The gallery wall where my name had been for 7 years was bare. The screws were still there. The brass plaque was gone. I didn't ask the curator. I walked past the wall and into the back room where he was loading crates with gloves on, moving with the quiet focus of someone finishing a job. He looked up, smiled, and handed me a coffee like this was the right order of things. 2 weeks earlier, he'd interrupted a delivery I was overseeing, stepping between a forklift and a crate that was tipping. He didn't raise his voice. He put his shoulder where it needed to be and held until the weight settled. The driver swore. The crate didn't break. He stayed to help unload the rest, reading labels, calling out measurements, already part of it. He worked for the shipping company contracted for the exhibition. Younger than me. Careful with objects. He asked practical questions. He asked my name and remembered it an hour later. When he left, he wrote his number on a packing slip in case anything arrived damaged after hours. By the end of the day, I had his number saved under logistics. He showed up again the next morning with a replacement hinge for a crate that had squeaked. He said it would bother him if he didn't fix it. He fixed it and cleaned the dust. He didn't stay. We started eating lunch together because it was easier than not. He brought food from a place near the docks and sat on the concrete steps behind the building, careful not to spill on his clothes. He listened when I talked about donors and deadlines. He asked how long I'd been doing this and nodded like the answer fit something he already knew. He began handling small things without being asked, tracking arrivals, relabeling boxes when the ink smudged. He stayed late the night the lights failed and waited with me until they came back on. He walked me to my car without comment. When my assistant called in sick, he stepped in and ran messages between departments with a phone he barely looked at. He didn't overstep. He filled gaps. When I thanked him, he shrugged and said it kept things moving. We didn't go out. We drifted into dinners after work because neither of us wanted to cook. He learned the names of artists I'd stopped explaining to people. He learned which donors required calls and which preferred quiet acknowledgement. He didn't ask to be introduced. He was already there when it mattered. I gave him a spare badge so he wouldn't have to wait for security when he arrived early. It was temporary, just for the run of the exhibition. He clipped it to his belt and used it like he'd always had one. The first night he stayed over, he slept on the far side of the bed. He woke before me and left a note on the counter saying he'd made coffee and replaced the filter. The coffee tasted right. I noticed the plaque was missing the morning after he helped me renegotiate a late delivery. I noticed because the wall looked unfinished without it. When I asked the curator, he said it had been moved as part of a refresh. He said the decision came down from above. Above was vague. Above was quiet. He offered to look into it. He didn't promise anything. He asked who handled installations and made a call while we stood by the freight elevator. He didn't tell me what was said. He told me he'd let me know. That evening, we sorted paperwork at my kitchen table. He organized stacks by size, not date, which made sense once I saw it. He flagged a discrepancy and set it aside. He washed the mugs when we were done. When he kissed me, it was brief, careful, like something practiced enough to look natural. The next morning, my badge didn't open the staff entrance. His did. I tried the badge again, slower this time. It flashed red and went dead in my hand. He was already inside, talking to security like this was a small delay. Nothing worth marking. He glanced back, saw me, and held the door from the other side so I could slip through on his access. Inside, the day moved the way it always did. Installers argued quietly. The lighting team adjusted angles by inches. Someone needed a signature on a condition report and handed the clipboard to him without looking. He passed it to me after already flagged where to sign. He walked with me through the main hall and pointed out a misalignment in one of the wall mounts. He didn't say it was wrong. He said it might read better if it shifted left. We shifted it. It did read better. I asked about the plaque again while we waited for the elevator. He said he'd spoken to someone in operations. He said it like an explanation, not an apology. At lunch, he handed me a phone number written on the edge of a napkin. He said it was the donor liaison handling the refresh. He said I could call or he could. He said it didn't matter. I let him. By the end of the day, my name was back on the wall. Smaller, lower, but there. The curator smiled like this was a win. He squeezed my shoulder and said it had been sorted. That night he stayed over again. He folded his clothes and put them on the chair, not the floor. He didn't move anything that wasn't already in use. In the morning, he left early and texted that the first shipment had cleared inspection. He started arriving before I did. When I came in, there were notes on my desk summarizing what had landed overnight. Nothing formal, just bullet points in a neat hand. I stopped checking the manifest myself. He began joining meetings he hadn't been invited to, not by insisting, by being present when decisions needed to be made. He'd stand near the door and answer questions when they were asked generally. Someone would say, "Can we do that?" And he'd say yes or no with a reason that fit. I gave him access to the shared drive so he wouldn't have to keep asking for files. It was limited, just logistics and schedules. He organized it without changing anything I cared about. One evening, we stayed late to deal with a crate that had arrived damaged. He documented everything carefully, took photos, filed a report. He handled the call with the insurer while I watched the security feed. When it was done, he handed me the phone so I could confirm. The adjuster thanked me for my efficiency. At home, we ate standing up in the kitchen. He leaned against the counter and listened the way people listen when they're memorizing patterns, not feelings. He didn't offer solutions. He asked what I needed tomorrow. I told him rest. He set an alarm and turned off the lights. There were small things I noticed and didn't stop. A meeting moved on my calendar without me moving it. A shipment rerouted to arrive earlier than planned. A message sent in my name that I hadn't typed but would have. I started noticing that his tenderness never changed. Not when I was tired. Not when I was angry. Not when I pulled away. It was always the same temperature. The first time someone referred to him as my partner, I didn't correct them. He didn't either. At the end of the week, security handed me a temporary badge. Mine was being reissued. They said it was routine. They said it would be ready soon. He clipped his badge back onto his belt and held the door again. I walked through. The temporary badge worked everywhere except the archives. I found out when I went down alone to pull a condition report I'd approved years earlier. The door didn't open. I tried again. Same red flash. When I stepped back into the hall, he was already there, like he'd been moving toward me before I turned around. He tapped his badge and held the door. He didn't ask why I was there. Inside, he moved ahead of me, already scanning shelves. He knew the layout better than I expected. He pulled the file I needed and handed it to me without comment. When I asked how he knew where it was, he said he'd helped inventory during a late shift. He said it casually like it had come up. We spent the afternoon in meetings that used to be mine. Not taken from me. Shared. He sat slightly back from the table and spoke when someone looked uncertain. He didn't interrupt. He filled pauses. When a decision stalled, he reframed it and people nodded. I signed where I was supposed to sign. He gathered papers and stacked them neatly. At the end of the day, the curator asked if we could step into his office. He closed the door and said the sponsor wanted a single point of contact for operations during the final stretch. He said it was about clarity. He said it would make things smoother. He said my name came up as the ideal person with support. He looked at him, not me, when he said support. The form was already on the desk. Not a contract. An authorization. Temporary. Limited to the exhibition window. It named him as operational lead with delegated authority to execute on my behalf. It said I retained oversight. It said decisions would be logged. It said everything would revert at close. I read it. I recognized the language. I'd approved similar things before for people I trusted. The curator watched my face. He didn't rush me. He said the sponsor was pressing. He said timing mattered. He stood by the window looking out, giving me space. I signed without standing up. After that, the pace changed. Not faster. Cleaner. After that, people stopped waiting for my answers. Emails stopped looping me in unless my name was required. Schedules updated without my input. When questions came, they came through him. He filtered. He summarized. He told me what I needed to know. At home, he cooked more. He stocked the fridge with things I liked without asking. He slept closer. In the mornings, he left early and texted updates before I was fully awake. I stopped setting my own reminders. There were things that didn't quite line up. A donor thanked me for a call I hadn't made. A shipment arrived that I'd thought was delayed. A decision was announced publicly before I'd seen it internally. Each time there was an explanation that fit the shape of the work. One evening, we were at my table again, papers spread out. He asked if I wanted him to handle the remaining approvals directly so I wouldn't be pulled into every minor thing. He said it would reduce noise. He said it was only for the next 2 weeks. He slid a pen toward me and pointed to a line on a second page I hadn't noticed before. It expanded the delegation slightly. Not new authority, just clearer language. I signed without standing up. The next morning, my calendar was empty. Not canceled. Cleared. There was a single block at the end of the day labeled check-in. His name was on it. At work, people greeted me warmly and walked past. Questions went around me. Decisions landed elsewhere. I spent the afternoon reviewing documents that no longer required my input. When I tried the archives again, the door opened on his badge, not mine. He didn't look back to see if I followed. The check-in lasted 7 minutes. We sat across from each other in a glass-walled office that used to be a meeting room no one booked. He had his phone on the table face down. I had nothing. He ran through updates in a flat sequence, not looking up. Items resolved. Items pending. No questions needed. When I tried to interrupt, he lifted a finger without breaking rhythm and finished his sentence first. When he was done, he asked if I needed anything. I said no and realized it didn't change his tone at all. After that, he stopped coming home every night. Sometimes he texted late that he'd crashed near the docks. Sometimes there was nothing. His toothbrush stayed where it was. His clothes stayed folded. The apartment didn't shift enough to register absence. At the gallery, my role became undefined. Not removed. Not acknowledged. People still smiled. They just didn't stop. When something went wrong, it was already being handled. When something went right, it wasn't mentioned. I tried to access the shared drive from my office and found folders missing. Not deleted. Reassigned. I could see the top level and nothing beneath it. When I asked IT, they said permissions had been streamlined to reduce overlap. They said the request came through operations. He didn't mention it. I started arriving earlier. He was already there. I started staying late. He left before me. We moved around the same building without intersecting. When we did cross paths, it was brief and public. A nod. A touch on the arm that ended quickly. At home, he spoke less. When he did, it was logistical. He asked if the dog had been fed. He asked if I'd be late. He didn't ask how my day was. He answered texts hours later with single confirmations. One night, I reached for his phone while he was in the shower because it kept vibrating on the counter. It was locked. I hadn't noticed when that changed. I set it back where it was. He didn't mention it when he came out. The curator stopped me in the hall and said the sponsor was impressed. He said the transition had been seamless. He said I should be proud of the team I'd built. He said my vision was clearly being honored. I didn't ask what that meant. 2 days later, a press release went out. My name was in it. Not at the top. Not where it used to be. I read it twice to be sure. The language was careful. Collaborative. Forward-looking. It positioned me as legacy without saying the word. That evening, he cooked dinner and set the table. Real plates. Candles we hadn't used before. He poured wine and waited for me to sit. He talked about the opening night schedule. He talked about crowd flow. He talked about security. I asked if this was temporary. He said everything was temporary. We slept in the same bed that night. He stayed on his side. When I reached for him, he didn't move away. He didn't move closer either. In the morning, he was gone before I woke up. At work, my badge stopped opening staff-only areas. Not all at once. One door at a time. Each failure felt accidental until it wasn't. I went to security. They said there had been a change request. They said it was standard during final installs. They said my access would be restored after the exhibition. I asked who submitted it. They checked and told me operations. That afternoon, I received a calendar invite forwarded to me, not addressed to me. It was for a meeting already in progress. His name was listed as chair. Mine was not listed at all. I didn't join. When I got home, his things were still there, exactly as before. But one drawer in the kitchen was empty, the one he used. I stood there longer than I needed to, holding the handle. Then I closed it. The opening night program went to print without my approval. I found out because a junior coordinator brought me a copy to sign for records, the way she always had. She hesitated when she handed it over, like she'd already been told something had changed but didn't know how to say it. My name was there, buried, listed under acknowledgments, not leadership. I signed the record copy anyway. She took it and thanked me too quickly. That evening, he didn't come home. There was a message an hour later saying the night would run late and he'd stay near the gallery. No explanation. No follow-up. The apartment stayed quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't invite rest. The next morning, I arrived early and found my office door locked. Not jammed. Locked. I stood there with my coffee cooling in my hand until someone from facilities walked by and unlocked it with a master key. He didn't look surprised. He said they were consolidating spaces for the opening. Inside, my shelves were half empty, personal items boxed and stacked neatly in the corner. Not discarded. Archived. My desk was clear except for a single folder labeled Post-Exhibition. I didn't open it. In the hall, I heard his voice before I saw him. He was briefing a group from the sponsor, speaking with the same calm certainty he used at home. He gestured toward the main space and they followed him without question. When he noticed me, he paused just long enough to nod, then kept walking. Later that day, an email went out confirming final roles for opening night. It came from his address. It thanked everyone for flexibility and focus during a complex transition. My role was listed as consultant. Time limited. Honorary. No one replied all. That night, he came home earlier than expected. He put his keys down quietly and started clearing the counter like it was routine. He didn't look at me when he said we should talk. He didn't sit. He said the sponsor wanted continuity. He said they trusted him to deliver. He said my legacy was secure. He said I'd be credited properly. He said this didn't have to be uncomfortable if we handled it cleanly. I asked when he planned to tell me. He said he assumed I already knew. He slept on the couch that night. In the morning, he was gone again, leaving behind the mug he always used, rinsed and upside down. At work, security stopped me at the staff entrance. They checked my badge and apologized. They escorted me through the public entrance instead. People watched without staring. In the afternoon, the curator asked if I could clear my office completely by end of day. He said it gently. He said it wasn't personal. He said the space was needed. I packed slowly. I left things that didn't matter. I took the plaque mounting screws from my desk drawer without knowing why. When I got home, his suitcase was by the door. Packed. Closed. He wasn't there to explain it. There was a note on the counter this time. One sentence. He said the apartment lease would be easier if one of us stepped back. He said he'd already made arrangements. I didn't call him. The opening night photos went live before midnight. He was in most of them. Centered. Confident. The captions used his title. I wasn't in the photos at all. I turned off my phone and sat on the floor with my back against the cabinet he'd fixed when we first met. The hinge still didn't squeak. In the morning, the gallery doors opened to the public. I wasn't expected to be there. The day after the opening, my access expired completely. There was no notification. I showed up out of habit, coffee in hand, and the front desk asked if I had a public ticket. The staff entrance didn't register my badge at all. Not read. Nothing. The guard checked the screen and told me my credentials were no longer active. He said it like weather. Inside, the gallery was full. People moved slowly, reading labels, listening to guides repeat language I'd written years ago. and no longer recognized. His name was everywhere. On placards, in brochures, in the short bio mounted near the entrance, framed cleanly, centered at eye level. I stood long enough to see him from across the main hall. He was explaining something to a donor. Hands relaxed, voice steady. He didn't scan the room. He didn't need to. When the donor laughed, he leaned in slightly, like he'd learned the rhythm of this space by heart. I left before he noticed me. At home, the apartment was quieter than it had ever been. His suitcase was gone. So was the spare badge I'd once given him and forgotten about. The drawer where we kept documents was empty except for a single envelope addressed to me in his handwriting. Inside was a copy of the authorization I'd signed months earlier, the one that had seemed narrow and temporary. A sticky note was attached. It said everything had been handled in accordance with that document. It said there was nothing further required from me. That afternoon, an email arrived from the board. Short, grateful. It acknowledged my contributions and confirmed that my consulting period had concluded. It wished me success in future endeavors. It didn't ask for anything. I forwarded it to myself and archived it. The following week, a courier delivered a box from the gallery. Inside were the last of my things. A notebook, a framed photo from an old opening, the plaque that had once been on the wall, wrapped carefully in brown paper, the screws taped to the back. There was no letter. I leaned the plaque against the wall in my living room and didn't hang it. The holes in the wall at the gallery would be filled by now. Painted over. Smooth. One evening, I found the hinge on the cabinet under the sink had loosened. It made a soft sound when I opened it. I knelt down and tightened it myself. The sound stopped. The cabinet closed cleanly. Later, I checked my phone and saw his number was no longer saved. I didn't remember deleting it. I searched anyway. Nothing came up. A week after that, the lease transfer went through. My name was removed. His wasn't added. The apartment reverted to month under a management contact I didn't recognize. I paid the final utility bill and canceled the rest. On my last night there, I walked through each room with the lights off. The place felt staged, neutral, ready for someone else. I left the plaque behind, propped against the wall, still wrapped. In the morning, I locked the door and dropped the keys through the slot as instructed. Across town, banners were already coming down from the gallery facade. The exhibition had entered its steady phase. Reviews were favorable. His name appeared in them without context, without history. I read one article on my phone while sitting in a cafe I'd never been to before. Called the transition seamless. Called the leadership decisive. I closed the article. The chair across from me stayed empty. No one asked if it was taken. I finished my coffee and left the cup on the table. What stayed with me wasn't the loss of the job or the apartment or the title. It was the certainty that none of the tenderness had been real. The care had been precise. The love had been a role. Nothing followed.